Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity to educate ourselves on an issue of profound environmental and economic consequence, deep sea mining. It's unfortunate indeed that our president has already issued an executive order on this topic, even knowing that we had this hearing forthcoming, showing his disregard for transparency and public input. Let me be clear from the outset. Deep sea mining is a high-risk, low-reward endeavor. It carries grave risks to our oceans and communities with no credible evidence of return on investment. Supporters of deep sea mining argue it will meet an urgent demand for minerals like cobalt, nickel, copper, and manganese, currently essential for electric vehicles and renewable energy. But the math simply does not add up. The industry's financial models are based on wildly optimistic assumptions and fail to reflect the volatility and reality of global mineral markets. Between 2016 and 2023, electric vehicle production skyrocketed by 2,000%. Yet over that same period, nickel prices only rose 28%, copper 21%, and cobalt prices fell by 10%. If prices remained stagnant or even dropped during the most significant boom in EV production to date, it's a stretch to assume prices will spike in the future to support a new, highly capital-intensive mining operation in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. It's important to note that China, the world's largest producer of electric vehicles and responsible for 61% of global rare earth mineral production, has already moved away from using cobalt in EV batteries. If cobalt were truly essential to the future of clean energy, they wouldn't be leaving it behind. We also need to be honest about what's actually in the seabed. Polymetallic nodules contain only 4 commercially viable metals. Claims that deep sea mining will solve supply chain needs for rare earth elements or national security critical materials are exaggerated and grossly misleading. These minerals are not found in significant quantities on the ocean floor, and extracting them from nodules is inefficient and environmentally devastating. And let's talk about cost. Deep sea mining is no different than other high-risk industrial endeavors. It demands massive upfront capital investment. The record shows that 2/3 of large-scale industrial extractive projects go over budget, often by 50% or more. There is no reason to believe deep sea mining will fare any better, especially given the extreme challenges of working at depths of 13,000 feet, where intense pressure, freezing temperatures, and corrosive conditions make operations both technically and financially risky. We've already seen what this risk looks like in practice. The company leading the charge, the metals company, projected it could extract 12 million tons of material per year. But in 2022, after a 2-month test, it recovered just 3,000 tons, less than 1% of its target. That's not a proof of concept, it's a red flag. And now that these startups are running out of cash, they're looking to the Trump administration for a bailout. President Trump's executive order to fast-track deep-sea mining permits in international waters allows companies like the metals company to bypass the International Seabed Authority. Such a move would violate international law, strain relations with Pacific communities, and set a dangerous precedent for unilateral exploitation, opening the door for adversaries like China and Russia to justify expanding their own maritime activities. The industry itself seems to recognize the writings on the wall. Major corporations like Google, BMW, Samsung, and Volkswagen have pledged not to source minerals from deep sea. Financial institutions, including Lloyd's and Standard Chartered, are refusing to back deep sea mining. Even longtime backers like Maersk and Lockheed Martin have pulled their support. The deep sea mining industry lacks not just a social license to operate, it lacks a business case. Meanwhile, viable alternatives are emerging. Battery innovation is reducing the need for cobalt and nickel, and investment in recycling, the circular economy technologies is growing rapidly. By 2050, nearly half of all cobalt and nickel needs could be met through recycling alone. We do not need to bulldoze the bottom of the ocean to power our clean energy future. The economic argument is a mirage, the financial risk is immense, and the consequences to ecosystems, to fisheries, to indigenous communities, and to our global climate are too great to ignore. I urge my colleagues to reject deep-sea mining as a viable path forward and instead invest in the sustainable, science-based alternatives that truly support our clean energy and conservation goals. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman. I now recognize the full committee's ranking member, Mr. Huffman from California, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think we agree on something. This country needs an effective and comprehensive strategy to meet our mineral needs to transition to a clean energy economy. We might not agree on that last part, but we agree on the need for a mineral strategy. Unfortunately, that's not what we're talking about here today. Deep sea mining is a dirty, destructive, and unproven industry threatening to decimate one of the last untouched ecosystems on Earth. And despite what proponents claim, it is not the great silver bullet that solves our critical mineral problem. It's much more likely that it will create a whole new class of problems, especially if it's pursued in the reckless cowboy manner reflected in President Trump's imperial edict. At its core, deep-sea mining involves deploying massive industrial machinery to scrape the ocean floor, sucking up the top few inches of sediment and the unique life that resides in it, in search of metal-rich nodules. That sediment, crushed marine life, and nodules are all pumped to the surface where the minerals are extracted and the waste is simply dumped back in the ocean. On a commercial scale, this would unleash a chain reaction of destruction. We can't even fully measure it, let alone fully mitigate it. What we do know is this: the deep sea plays a crucial role in regulating carbon. It is home to an extraordinary wealth of biodiversity, and it provides habitat for species that we're only now beginning to understand and to discover. A single seabed mining operation could affect an area the size of a small country. Toxic plumes could travel hundreds, even thousands of miles, disrupting entire midwater food webs, including tuna, whales, and other species that support our economy. And the damage would be permanent. There is one deep-sea mining test that shows visible damage and a 4-fold decrease in foundational microbial activity 26 years after the early test run. And look, say what you will about land-based mining, but at least we can require remediation, cleanup. We can even have mining companies sometimes leave parks and other nice things when they're done. You can't do that with deep-sea mining. You simply wreck it and move on. And here's the kicker: for all that destruction, deep-sea mining doesn't even pencil out. The industry has very questionable market prospects because battery technology is rapidly changing. Anyone remember nickel-cadmium batteries? They're essentially obsolete now. Today, EV markets are already moving away from the nickel, cobalt, copper, and manganese found in deep-sea nodules towards other minerals. Folks who want to make money on this are skating to where the puck is or was, not skating to where the puck is going to be. I'll mention Tesla, for example, just to make my friends across the aisle happy. It already builds half of its EVs without nickel and cobalt. Part of the poor economic outlook is the sheer engineering and technical challenge of this as well, operating in a harsh environment, machinery that has to survive crushing pressures 3 to 4 miles below the surface, freezing temperatures, enduring extreme salinity and corrosion, and somehow you got to repair all of that machinery without easy access to infrastructure. Trials to date have been riddled with failure. No one has demonstrated that deep-sea mining can work at scale or even turn a profit. Making matters worse, deep-sea mining is not an alternative to land-based mining, as its supporters claim. There's no reason to think any country would scale back land mining, even if seabed mining were to defy gravity and become reality. The minerals from deep-sea mining are likely to be significantly more expensive than those from terrestrial mining. So we could end up doubling down on environmental harm, getting all the land-based mining and wrecking the ocean. That's not progress, it is subsidized plunder. Fortunately, the global community, including banks, insurers, and businesses, are not buying it. 24 countries have already called for a moratorium, including countries where mining exploration has been tried. The Global Tuna Alliance and other seafood industry groups have called for a halt to deep-sea mining because of the risk that it poses to disrupting feeding, breeding, and migration patterns for tuna. Indigenous leaders across the Pacific have also raised powerful objections. Their spiritual, cultural, and economic connection to the ocean is deep and enduring, and mining threatens to sever that connection forever. Instead of pursuing this reckless fantasy, we should be scaling up on solutions we know are effective. Battery innovation, recycling infrastructure, product redesign, building a true circular economy that keeps materials in use and ecosystems intact. We have federal laws, the Inflation Reduction Act and the IIJA, that have started us in that direction. Let's work together down that path instead of chasing the folly of deep-sea mining. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from California. We will allow the chairman of the regular committee to speak when he comes in. But first, for now, we're going to introduce our witnesses. Mr. Gerald Barron, CEO and Chairman, the Metals Company and the Metals Company USA, Raleigh, North Carolina. Mr. Oliver Gunnesakara, did I say it right? Gunnesakara? CEO and co-founder, Impossible Metals, San Jose, California. Mr. Duncan Curry, legal advisor, Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, Christchurch, New Zealand. And Mr. Thomas Peacock, professor of mechanical engineering and director, Environmental Dynamics Laboratory, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Let me remind the witness that under committee rules, you must limit your oral statements to about 5 minutes. What you're going to see is you're going to see a little timer in front of you. When it goes green, you get going. When you start to see yellow, start wrapping it up, and when it's red, stop. Okay, so we can keep everybody. There's going to be a lot of questions coming your way this day. So now what I'm going to do is I have the pleasure to see your full statement when we're done. So after that, I now recognize Mr. Barron for his first 5 minutes.
Committee Chairman Westerman, Ranking Member Huffman, Subcommittee Chairman Gosser, Ranking Member Dexter, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share my views on the potential of deep-sea mining to American critical mineral production. And as a veteran of the deep-sea minerals industry and the chairman and CEO of the Metals Company, I can say with certainty that this industry is at an inflection point where America can take the lead. I intend to make this case across 3 key points. First, America's mineral dependence is reversible. And from the 1880s to the 1970s, America was a mining and processing powerhouse. And since domestic production sank, leaving America dangerously dependent on adversaries. And we can change this without sacrificing American landscapes or communities. 4 days sailing from San Diego lies the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, where polymetallic nodules sit 2.5 miles deep on the seafloor. And they're rich in nickel and cobalt and manganese and copper. And these nodules hold more of these 4 minerals than all known land-based reserves combined. And just 1 billion tons of the 21 billion tons of nodules in the CCZ could supply over 450 years of the United States manganese needs, 150 years of cobalt needs, and 80 years of nickel needs. Developed over 20 years, 1 billion tons could create more than 100,000 jobs, generate 300 billion in GDP, and revitalize shipyards, offshore industries, and manufacturing. And second, the US pioneered this industry, the technology, and the robust regulations. And over 60 years ago, America Consortia successfully developed and tested nodule mining technologies. And they developed US regulations that spanned 5 administrations. And NOAA led the world in deep-sea mining mineral governance, building a full framework pioneering environmental science through the deep ocean mining environmental study, and delivering a decade of rigorous impact studies and reports to Congress. It set the global standard for responsible seabed development long before international negotiations began. And by 1989, America had a regulatory regime for seabed mining that was environmentally responsible, commercially viable, and consistent with international law. And the same cannot be said for the efforts at the United Nations, where 1982 Law of the Sea Treaties, seabed mining provisions, were so unworkable that industrialized nations, including the United States, refused to ratify it and still have not. And after finalizing exploration regulations in 2000, the ISA took 14 years just to begin drafting a mining code and has missed adoption deadlines in 2020, 2023, and likely again in 2025. This is not incompetence, this is a deliberate strategy by activists, land mining nations and green coalition governments to stall by any means necessary. Meanwhile, China has become the largest holder of ISA mineral rights, pushing draft regulations that ban US-flagged vessels and ports while favoring state-backed enterprises. And while TMC and Western explorers lead offshore technology, China is close behind, and with its dominance in land-based processing, it's clear why deep-sea mining is one of China's core resource strategies. And third, the real-world data has debunked every major activist claim against deep-sea nodule collection. Onshore, the benefits are clear. 100% of the nodule is used with near-zero solid waste, no toxic tailings, and far lower life cycle impacts than land-based mining. Offshore, the facts are just as strong, and I direct the committee to my written submission for a detailed rebuttal of the common environmental myths used to confuse the public. And in closing, with seabed minerals, America can end critical mineral dependence, reclaim leadership in offshore innovation, inspire generations of American engineers, scientists, and mariners, and create over 100,000 American jobs and generate hundreds of billions in GDP. And as evidenced by President Trump's executive order signed last week, this administration recognizes the ability for seabed mineral resources to expand American mineral production and ensure the nation's energy, security, and industrial competitiveness for generations. Thank you for your attention and your commitment to securing America's mineral future.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. I now recognize Mr. Gunsakkara. Did I say it right? Okay. For his 5 minutes. Thank you.
Chairman Gozer, Ranking Member Dexter, Chairman Westerman, Ranking Member Huffman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Oliver Gunsakkara. I am the CEO and co-founder of Impossible Metals. I came to this country 20 years ago as a proud naturalized citizen, have been inspired by the kind of innovation only possible in America. I'm an entrepreneur, and I have founded 3 American companies. I founded Impossible Metals because I recognized critical minerals have the same strategic importance as coal in the 19th century, oil in the 20th century. It's an essential resource that will determine America's prosperity, security, and leadership for the 21st century. The demand for critical metals is accelerating. We can meet the shortfall, but only with new minerals because recycling, substitution, or demand reduction fail to meet America's needs. There just is not enough material in circulation for recycling to move the needle in the next 25 years. Substitution comes with compromises, such as a reduced driving range. With new mineral sources, the only remaining option would be a diminished economy. Families having one less car or turning off the air conditioner. AI and robotics now enable a low-cost, clean way to collect minerals from the vast, untapped resources of the deep sea. Technology can meet the moment for our nation, enabling the United States to secure resources our global competitors seek to deny us, and to do so more responsibly than most believed were possible even a few years ago. Impossible Metals is an American company that will responsibly harvest nickel, copper, cobalt, manganese, and rare earth elements from the deep sea. These minerals are vital for America's defense, infrastructure, and energy industries. Our underwater robots hover to collect the mineral-rich nodules from the seabed. Through an AI-driven selective harvesting, we pick up nodules individually, avoiding all visible life, and leaving 60% of the nodules untouched to preserve the marine biodiversity. Today, a new land-based mine in the US takes 29 years. Seabed mining is the vital alternative. We can deliver critical minerals at commercial scale in just 3 years, 10x faster, 10x cheaper, 10x lower impact, and without relying on China. No commercial deep-sea mining has yet occurred, For the last 60 years, we have been preparing for this moment. We now have enough data to understand the limited impacts of deep-sea mining. In fact, each project must document any environmental impacts and how they are addressed before commercial deep-sea mining can start. Deep-sea mining is just an option. It's the inevitable future of global mineral production. The critical questions we face today are about who will set the standards and how will it be conducted. America must lead to secure the economic and national security interests, ensure environmental stewardship, and protect human rights. We can do so because we are the technology leader and because we have an enormous reserve of nodules in our own domestic waters. We have the chance to build a new American industry, leveraging American resources. Success would generate $300 billion in domestic economic output over 10 years and create more than 100,000 jobs. The biggest barrier is legacy regulations. Regulatory uncertainty has inhibited investment and slowed domestic production, but the government can unlock this industry. The Trump administration last week took bold action, and Congress should support and build on that. First and foremost, we must unlock domestic resources. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has authority to offer leases in US waters believed to contain over 1 billion tons of minerals. Impossible Metals has formally requested that the Bureau initiate this leasing procedure, with the decision expected by late May. Congress should support and streamline this process. Going further, Congress can accelerate this industry by adding nodules to the defense stockpile, building domestic mineral processing capabilities, accelerating exploration, and funding American innovation. By acting decisively, America can ensure energy abundance and create hundreds of thousands of quality jobs and establish a robust, responsible leadership in critical industry of the future. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gensakara. Now, Mr. Curry, you're recognized for 5 minutes, all the way from New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And a privilege to give evidence before this important committee on this crucial issue of deep-sea mining. I have practiced international ocean law for over 35 years. I've attended negotiations at the International Seabed Authority since 2012, and I advise the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition in matters of international law. I presented written submissions to this committee that cover a range of concerns with deep-sea mining. In this oral testimony, I will focus on why deep-sea mining is unnecessary and why pursuing it would bring the US only problems, not solutions. Firstly, seabed mining is unnecessary. The 4 metals that can be practically sourced from nodules, copper, cobalt, nickel, and manganese, none of which are rare earth elements. Because manganese and copper are inexpensive, nodules are really all about nickel and cobalt. The market for these is volatile, with prices currently relatively low. As we've heard from the members this morning, EV batteries are moving rapidly to lithium iron phosphate technology, which uses no cobalt or nickel. The OECD tells us that the economic case for deep seabed mining is not evident. Terrestrial mines are more cost-effective for these minerals. The technology is tried and tested. Terrestrial deposits will meet foreseeable future demands, especially as technological advancements in battery chemistries continue to move away from critical minerals. Stockpiling, as was suggested in last week's executive order, will support future demand and makes a great deal of sense, particularly for cobalt and nickel. The circular economy has an important role to play: reuse, repurpose, recycle. There is no commercial deep-sea mining happening anywhere. There are no full-scale mining machines built. The technology required would operate 5,000 metres deep, much deeper than oil and gas installations in hostile environments. It will be monumentally expensive to build all of the ships, mining equipment and monitoring systems necessary for this industry. The junior companies before you today have weak financing and subscale, unproven technology that cannot be relied on. The metals company grew out of Nautilus Minerals, which failed in Papua New Guinea, ending with the company in liquidation and costing Papua New Guinea over $100 million. Next, seabed mining is harmful. In addition to damaging the seafloor and removal of the nodules, the damage from benthic plumes and noise impacts, the metals company would discharge a midwater plume of sediment, metal particles, and dissolved metals into the water column. The metal company sometimes likes to confuse the benthic or seafloor plume with the midwater plume. They're separate, and it is the midwater plume that will travel hundreds of kilometres. Even if impossible metals technology does avoid the midwater plume, there is no way to avoid the fundamental removal of nodules, which has critical impacts on deep-sea ecosystems. The plume would likely impact valuable fisheries and ecosystems, crucial to the US and Pacific countries, as well as potential marine genetic resources used for pharmaceuticals. Next, scientific knowledge is inadequate. Scientific information and understanding about the deep sea is critically lacking. 90% of 5,000 species in the Clarion-Clipperton zone are still undescribed, and we are only now discovering that deep-sea oxygen is being produced, possibly by the nodules themselves. This illustrates what we do not know about the deep sea. Next to international repercussions, the 1982 Convention on the Law of the Sea governs the ocean. It is known as the Constitution for the Ocean. The deep sea is universally acknowledged to be the common heritage of humankind. The treaty's purview includes maritime boundaries, extended continental shelf claims, and freedom of navigation for vessels. The US could endanger all of those if it issues permits unilaterally. Mr. Barron did not tell you that the US has signed the 1994 implementing agreement, which addressed a lot of the issues that the US had with the early problems with, the 1992 convention. And as we've heard from the members, already insurance companies and financial institutions are turning their backs on deep-sea mining. There is global opposition to deep-sea mining, and this includes the United States and territories across the Pacific. 32 countries support a moratorium or a pause which would put an end to the current discord and chaos, allow the necessary science to be gathered, and for the implications of deep-sea mining to be understood. The deep sea is a treasure trove of biodiversity and home to untold wonders and possibilities. Destroying these possibilities and going it alone will be disadvantageous to the United States, economically, scientifically, and environmentally. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
I thank you, Mr. Curry. Now we recognize Dr. Peacock for his 5 minutes.
Chairman Gosa, Ranking Member Dexter, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to talk today. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at MIT, where I lead the Environmental Dynamics Lab. For the past decade, one of our focuses has been on the environmental impacts of deep-sea nodule mining. We do not take a position on deep-sea mining. Our mission is to perform objective research to inform discussions such as we are having today. Our researchers look closely at the behavior of sediment plumes, clouds of fine material stirred up from the seabed during mining operations. These plumes are critical to understand because they can create impacts beyond the immediate mining area. My research group at MIT and researchers around the world have made significant advances in understanding the potential impacts of deep-sea nodule mining activities. That research indicates that some of the proposed impacts of nodule mining may not be as severe as speculated. Some key findings are as follows. Test mining activities suspend roughly the top 2 inches of seabed sediment, not the 6 to 12 inches some had anticipated. Most of the disturbed material, between 92 and 98%, either resettled within roughly 300 feet of the mining tracks or remained suspended close to the seabed, typically within 2 feet. Only a small fraction of sediment, about 2 to 8%, was lofted higher into the water column, reaching up to 15 feet in height, not hundreds of feet. These plumes traveled away in concentrations of a few milligrams per litre, roughly the equivalent of a grain of sand in a fishbowl. Tracks from experimental mining in the 1970s are still visible today, but there is minimal evidence of the sediment plume to the side of the tracks. While persistent biological effects have been observed, the populations of several organisms, including animals in and on the sediment, and ranging from small to large sizes, have begun to re-establish themselves despite the physical changes to the seafloor. Across the Clarion-Clipperton zone, recent estimates suggest between 6,000 and 8,000 species inhabit the region, of which fewer than 500 have been formally described. Broadly speaking, the region has at least 2 major zones to the east and west, but within the CCZ, there is variability that affects the seafloor life. Specific areas would need to be protected, an approach the International Seabed Authority has been developing following the advice of scientific experts. Short-term pilot-scale trials have advanced our understanding, providing a starting point from which to research and assess the long-term impacts of proposed commercial-scale operations. To proceed responsibly, deep-sea mining would have to advance step by step. This would support reliable predictions of the environmental impacts of commercial-scale deep-sea mining, addressing critical concerns such as biodiversity loss and ecosystem function, and environmental monitoring would inform any necessary decisions to stop or amend operations. Achieving this will require technical innovation. While current sensors are capable of measuring key environmental parameters, they can be expensive and not yet suited for the large spatial scales and long time scales involved. This will require two things: affordable sensors and platforms, such as autonomous vehicles, to deploy them, energy sources and subsea communication technologies to extend their reach. Even with these advances, monitoring will inevitably be challenged by the vast scales of the ocean. Emerging computational systems, especially those enhanced by GPU-based processing and AI, can dramatically improve our ability to perform simulations, analyze data, and make informed decisions. The US should play an active role in the development and use of technology, sensors, and computational systems to inform deep-sea mining, but currently it is not. During the 1970s and early 1980s, the US was a global leader in deep-sea mining research and activities, exemplified by the NOAA Deep Ocean Mining Environmental Study, or DOMES project. Over the past 30 years, US government funding for deep-sea mining research has been absent. Meanwhile, China is surpassing the efforts of every other nation in conducting technology trials. The European Union has invested over $50 million in 3 deep-sea mining research programs. Japan has launched a $100 million initiative focused on nodule mining within its exclusive economic zone. And the full extent of investment by countries like China and India is not publicly known, but likely exceeds these figures many times over. Without strategic investment, the US risks falling behind. Fortunately, the US retains tremendous strength in deep ocean science and engineering. NOAA, with its experience and capabilities, is well positioned to lead US-based efforts. But the US will need to invest significantly and soon, or will be left to rely on the learnings and technological advancements made by other countries. That will make it harder for the US to engage in this nascent arena and to ensure that any future deep-sea mining activities are informed by the best science, the best monitoring capabilities, and the strongest protections. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank you, Dr. Peacock. The gentleman from Arkansas, the chairman for the full committee, is now recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Gosar, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. But now our country's reliance on critical and other hard rock minerals is widely known. These minerals are essential to America's national security, to our economy, to our energy infrastructure, and to many other things. This committee has repeatedly emphasized the importance of these minerals and of securing American mineral supply chains. Although the United States is blessed with some of the most abundant mineral deposits, our abilities to discover, extract, and process critical and other hard rock minerals have declined for decades. Not only have we closed refineries and processing facilities, but we've also choked mineral mining operations with red tape. At the same time, we have failed to effectively combat the lawfare waged by radical nonprofit groups who are determined to delay and terminate critical and crucial mineral projects within our borders. Fortunately, we have championed an all-of-the-above approach to mineral exploration and extraction policy. This approach includes streamlining permitting for terrestrial mining projects and encouraging American companies to continue investing in emerging technologies, which even include space mining. And today, we're here to better understand the possibilities of how the minerals readily available on the seafloor can be extracted in a manner that is both efficient and environmentally friendly. In fact, just last week, President Trump signed an executive order streamlining the process through which American companies can work to identify and extract minerals like cobalt, copper, manganese, and nickel from both American and international waters. These seabed minerals are most often found in rocks or polymetallic nodules that line the ocean's floor. These nodules are estimated to exist worldwide in numbers as great as 200 trillion tons and have the ability to produce the raw materials necessary for batteries, electronics, and steel. While venturing to the cold, dark depths of the seafloor to collect critical minerals sounds like something from a science fiction movie, the United States has possessed the technology and knowledge necessary for seabed mining since at least the 1970s. Today, American companies are leading the charge to not only utilize these capabilities, but also develop new and exciting technologies and methods to harvest polymetallic nodules from the seafloor in a manner that is both more efficient and friendly to the marine environment than was ever imagined. Frankly, other adversarial nations like China have eyed seabed mining without serious competition for the United States for far too long. We cannot continue to rely on China for the minerals we currently use, and we certainly cannot allow China to capture the market for offshore resources. This path would only continue to impose a never-ending threat of mineral supply chain collapse. Only by unleashing American offshore critical minerals and natural resources can we secure our own critical mineral supply chains. We can revolutionize energy production, we can strengthen our national security, and at the same time, we can grow our economy. I look forward to a robust discussion on how we can ensure efficient development of seabed mineral resources. I appreciate your expertise and for being here today to discuss this important issue. And I will say there's a lot going on in Congress this week. Hopefully more members will come in because this is such a critical discussion that we need to have. But I can assure you that people are very busy. There's other committee markups and hearings taking place, but that doesn't minimize the importance of what we're here to discuss today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We're now going to move into the questions from the members, so I'll recognize the members as we go down the road. Now we're going to recognize Mr. Case from Hawaii for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, and I truly appreciate your courtesy in allowing me to rejoin the Natural Resources Committee for this critical hearing. And it should come as no surprise that my concern is for our marine environment. I have introduced 2 pieces of legislation that would affirmatively place a moratorium on any domestic or international deep sea mining until we know exactly what's going on in our ocean. So no surprises where I'm coming from on this. Mr. Barron, back a couple of years ago when you were questioned about concerns with environmental impacts of deep sea mining, you stated in the press that where you wanted to mine is a quote-unquote marine desert. If you measure the amount of life there, it is measured in grams per square meter. There are no trees, no plants at all. You also said that your mechanism for deep sea mining is blasting a jet of water to the nodule to lift it up. In this part of the ocean floor, there isn't much to impact to begin with. You stand by those statements?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I do.
Okay, and what is the basis, the scientific environmental basis for your statements that basically there won't be any particular impacts from? Can you point to a specific study? Like you held up a bunch of paper there. Is that from the original act back in 1980, or is that more recent, or what's the basis for that statement?
Well, I think it begins with the fact that if we think about all of the landscapes on our planet, and if we were to draw a bar chart, and on the right-hand side, you'd have an environment that has the most life that could be impacted, and that would be called our tropical forests.
Yeah, what I'm asking for is, do you cite a specific scientific study?
Yes.
And where is that study for the basis for your statement? That's what I'm getting at.
Yes, and I'll get to that in a moment.
But I have a limited amount of time, so what I'm doing is I'm asking a very specific question. What is the scientific basis for your statement?
Well, I'll draw you to my testimonial, where we cite all of, or many of the studies that have been carried out. And in fact, just recently, of course, I heard people refer to the DOMES study that was carried out back from the trials that were done in the 1970s.
Okay.
Our own studies, we revisited the area where we had collected nodules from in 2022. And when we went back a year later, we found that Formenfera in the tracks had recovered 30% to pre-disturbance levels.
Okay,
and that's
so are
in 1
those
year.
your studies, Mr. Barron?
Well, they're studies we fund.
Your company's studies?
They're studies we fund.
Okay, yeah, they're studies you fund. And as far as the underlying environmental impact statement that you referenced, that was back to the 70s, which was related to the passage of the law in 1980 that we are relying upon today for our environmental protections. Is that correct, under the executive order?
The trials were done in 1979. And of course, the study that went back last year was a broad range of funders, all independent, who went back on a study that was published only 2 weeks ago, I believe.
Okay. All right. So I've read that executive order, and first of all, I see absolutely no reference to environmental protection whatsoever in the president's executive order. The word environment is mentioned once, and it's kind of a throwaway. It's a reference to a 1980 law, which we which we propose to proceed under. Obviously, a lot has changed, I believe, since 1980. So, Mr. Curry, let me just focus a couple of questions on you, because fundamentally, I don't think that we have those studies in hand right now. First of all, it strikes me that we are only studying one kind of extraction. So, for example, plucking a nodule off of the seafloor. The videos I've seen show a big old clamshell dredge coming down, impacting, going down deeper than 2 inches, by the way, and sucking up a bunch of the ocean floor. We also have the technique which is fundamentally strip mining the ocean floor and dragging stuff across it. Is there any limitation on what kind of mining we would be able to do under this executive order that you know of, or are we just focusing our studies only on one particular type of least intrusive impact?
Yes, I would not call it least intrusive impact. I think the kind of damage that you talk about is clear. In my opening remarks, I talked about the damage to the nodules. We know the nodules themselves have life on them. We know between 50 and 70% of deep sea life are dependent on the nodules. We know that the deep sea plume will smother the life that is down there. And it really is very deeply concerning to hear Mr. Barron make such clearly scientifically incorrect statements when this is the company that proposes to do the seabed mining in the deep sea 5,000 meters deep, far away from any regulatory authorities, far away from any controls.
I'm not going to overstep my welcome in this committee, and my time is up.
We'll do
Chair,
a second round if you'd like to stay around.
Thank you so much, and I would ask for a consent to be able to submit written records, written questions for this.
Without
Thank you so much.
so appreciate
Okay.
it. The gentlewoman from Oregon is recognized for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Barron, Lockheed Martin, a U.S. company with a market cap of about $100 billion and extensive experience in material needs for the defense industry, recently quit their investment in seabed mining and sold their seabed resources subsidiary. The shipping giant Maersk also recently dropped its investment in your company, and leading tech and EV companies, there's several of them, have joined calls for a moratorium. What do you know that these major companies didn't about the profitability of this industry or the necessity of extracting critical minerals from the seafloor for civilian and defense enterprises?
Thank you. Well, Lockheed Martin still have exploration licenses and under NOAA regulations. They did sell their licenses that they had been granted through the International Seabed Authority because of the uncertainty at that regulator being able to put in place the mining code. In answer to your question about what do I know that those car companies know? A lot. Because my company, the metals company, has spent hundreds of millions of dollars funding independent scientific organizations to carry out those environmental studies. And not one single name of those companies that you read out, those car companies, have ever contacted us to ask, what is your evidence? They claim to care a lot about the environment, and I'm sure if they really did, they'd want to hear both sides. What I can tell you is that the American car industry has not done that virtue signaling by saying, we'll join that moratorium.
So, understood. However, if it was a good investment, they don't need to necessarily know the science. They'll know that somebody's showing a profit. So given that the metals company has yet to demonstrate a commercially viable deep sea mining operation, how can you assure U.S. regulators and taxpayers that sponsoring your permit is not simply subsidizing a high-risk foreign startup with little to no guaranteed return?
America has an urgent need for critical minerals. America has a need to reindustrialize. It needs to secure these metals. The beauty of these nodules, of course, is that they're much more metal-rich compared to land-based alternatives, and that has a massive impact on the economics. The people that speculate about economic viability tend to be the activists who oppose the industry.
It's interesting that China has moved away from cobalt, which obviously is rich in here, and they have every reason to double down on that with their rich resources that they have available. So I would consider that when we're making those investments. Mr. Curie, thank you for coming. There's a lot of focus on resource exploration and the development of extraction technology on the seafloor, but recent studies suggest that the infrastructure needed to process polymetallic nodules is still uncertain and untested, and that no companies have developed plans for processing. Is the seabed mining industry prepared to process all the nodules they claim they'll bring to the surface?
That's a very good question, Member, because the crucial issue here is, frankly, processing. China dominates the market with these metals, particularly cobalt and nickel, because they dominate the processing. Processing is a very labour-intensive activity, very environmentally harmful activity, very difficult to do it. China's been doing it for many decades. And really, that is the answer to your question of what does the US do about access to minerals. It's not as if China's digging up the minerals from its own land and dominating the market in that way. It's doing it firstly because of the processing, secondly because of the access to minerals it has through to contracts and foreign direct investment. And there's no reason to believe it wouldn't do the same thing with deep sea mining. And I also note, with respect to your question to Mr. Barron, that Loki Minerals, who did purchase the shares in UK Seabed Resources, has gone bankrupt recently, just to add one more list of companies that have gone bankrupt during the attempts to seabed mine. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running short on time, but I did want to ask so the metals company has initiated a process to acquire licenses and permits to extract minerals from the ocean floor through the United States. These permits, and this is to you, Mr. Curie, these permits, which are supported by a recent executive order made by President Trump, risk violating international agreements governing ocean activities. Based on your experience with permitting at the International Seabed Authority, will major cuts to staff at BOEM and NOAA make it easier or harder for them to process these or issue these permits?
Issuing these permits will be an extraordinarily difficult issue. We're dealing with an area 5,000 metres deep in the area beyond national jurisdiction. This is why the International Seabed Authority has had such difficulty in finalising the regulations. It is a difficult thing to do. There are international legal complexities. There's questions about the actual title to the area that Mr. Barron will want to mine. There's questions about the access title to the minerals, because the law of the Sea Convention is very, very clear. No one country may expropriate minerals from the deep seabed. And there's a host of questions. The mining company that would undertake the physical mining for the metals company, Allseas, is a Swiss company. Switzerland is not going to allow their company to breach international law. Nauru must be deeply unhappy with what is happening there. Nauru either faces the twin horns of a dilemma: either get paid nothing for the minerals that is brought up by the metals company, or does get paid something and it participates in the breach of international law. And lastly, there's a question about the Jones Act. There's a host of very, very difficult questions, which frankly I don't envy the few remaining staffers at NOAA to have to deal with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. You're welcome. The gentleman, full committee chair, Mr. Westerman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Gosar. Mr. Gunasekera, hope I got that right. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to learn more about the work that you and your company are doing, and you recently submitted a formal request to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to begin the process of leasing harvesting rights within the U.S. exclusive economic zone off the coast of American Samoa. Why did you choose to initiate the process with BOEM at this time?
Well, the US critically needs these metals. I think it's very clear that China controls the vast majority of critical minerals, and yet in our own federal waters, we have huge quantities. And fortunately, Congress passed a law that allows US entities like ourselves to request the starting of this process. So we very much would like the administration to use the authority that Congress has given it to start the process so that we can actually ultimately get to the point where we can extract these minerals from the deep ocean around the territory of American Samoa. I want to be clear, though, we want to do this in an environmentally sensitive manner. We don't expect to be able to do it without an environmental impact statement and being very clear what is the impact. But in our view, we critically need an independent source of these minerals. These minerals are in our own waters. We can extract them with much less cost and much less time and much less environmental impact.
And it's, your company focuses only on picking up the nodules. You're not like some of the early technology where you're picking up a lot of material off of the floor. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a completely new type of collector. So our collector doesn't actually land. We're exclusively focused on the polymetallic nodules, the potato-sized rocks. So like all people going after this resource, there's no cutting or blasting. Literally, these are like golf balls on a driving range that we have to pick up. And now our vehicle hovers. It doesn't actually land, and it uses AI with its cameras to look for life. We know very occasionally, every few hundred nodules, there is a deep sea coral or a sponge. We will detect that using the AI on the vehicle, and then we will quarantine that area and fly over the top, leaving it completely undisturbed. In addition, we will always leave around 60% of the nodules, so left undisturbed. And because the vehicle is hovering, there is minimum sediment impact. We don't have a discharge plume. We minimize noise. We basically took as an input the environmental concerns and designed a 21st century technology solution to mitigate those concerns. We're also significantly less expensive. And I do want to be clear, our economic model, version 6, which is on our website, including the spreadsheet, is showing how we are 10 times less expensive than the average nickel mine in 2024. 10x, that's for the mining and the processing. This allows us to avoid Chinese dumping. The problem with China is that they're very, very good at manipulating the price and driving Western companies out of business. Because our cost base is going to be so low, we are somewhat isolated from that strategy.
It sounds like your technology has moved along at a faster pace than regulatory reforms. I know that in addition to BOEM, NOAA also plays a role in the process for seabed mining in the U.S., depending on which area is involved. Can you talk about the weaknesses and strengths of the different agencies involved in the permitting process?
The good news is that there is legislation. The bad news is that it's quite old and we feel could be improved. Specifically in the BOEM case, which is where we are focused, there are 4 public consultation periods. There is no defined timetable. Again, given the President's determination of an emergency, we would like to see a more dedicated time frame for when this process can start. I want to be clear, we want environmental review, we want to do an environmental impact. We are very strong in protecting the environment, but we don't want it to take decades. It's too important.
I agree with that, and that applies to many things. But, Mr. Chair, I'm going to go ahead and ask this question.
Go ahead, please.
A concern that I have, and you mentioned it in your testimony, is that the processing of all these critical minerals basically happens in China. You did mention that there are some other countries, I think Japan and Australia, that have some processing capabilities. But when we look at this issue from a national security standpoint, if we're simply mining the material and shipping it to China, we're not really helping ourselves on the national security. Talk about how much capacity is out there with more friendly countries and the need to co-develop processing facilities here in the U.S. or in Canada or somewhere close if we're going to be mining this material.
It's essential that we develop domestic capabilities, and I think the President's previous executive orders talk about that. But I think in the short term, stockpiling is a great option. It will stimulate the industry, and if we build the stockpiles in strategic locations in the US, where there is the infrastructure and the power, it will encourage industry to invest in building those. In the intermediate, we can do processing in friendly nations. The metals company actually has proven that Japan has the capability. They have worked with a partner there and actually proven that nodules can be processed in an existing nickel refinery. And our belief that that could also be duplicated in Australia and potentially in Canada as well. So we see 3 stages. First stage is stockpile. Second stage is reuse friendly nations. Third stage is build our own bespoke optimized processing here in the US.
I'm way out of time, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We're having a second round here. You know, I'm a touchy-feely guy. I actually have a nodule right here from the Mojave Desert. It's filled with nymbidium. I know you guys have some. Can you send those around to everybody, please? I got to tell you, when I went through TSA with that, everybody was talking about that nodule right there. So you'll see they're very interesting. Did you get a chance to see this, Ed?
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to say a nodule just like this one was presented to the President last week and now sits on the Resolute desk.
Well, I guess my point is I found this on a desert and it's surrounded by sand. So you think there would be some commonalities there, okay? Dr. Peacock, that's why I want to come back to you. It seems like you've been doing the studies that have shown there's really no impact. Can you give us a little bit more background on that?
Certainly, yeah. So we monitored the collect trials that took place in the Clarion-Clifton zone in 2021, and we established very clearly what the physics and what the scales of the plumes were. So as I stated in my testimony, 92 to 98% of the sediment deposited within about 300 feet of the mining activity. The remaining 2 to 8% of the sediment was about no higher than about 10 to 15 feet above the seabed. And happy to answer any more questions or further details.
Yeah,
on
well,
that.
so I'm curious. Is there anything else that could disturb those sands and the bedrock down below?
Natural processes, are you talking about?
Yeah, like volcanoes, seismic activity.
That's not been determined right now. In the Atlantic Ocean, there are some data sets that talk about what are called benthic storms that naturally suspend sediment. There's no data yet on that in the Pacific Ocean. And of course, those storms wouldn't remove nodules from the seabed.
Right, but I'm talking about more of the sand.
So at present, there's not data in the Pacific Ocean whether there's these benthic storms that would do that. There's some data in the Atlantic Ocean.
Now, are you familiar, Dr. Peacock, with microprocessors?
A little.
Okay, so the new technology is getting everything out of this ore. So it's pulverized. My understanding, there's a number of sequences. There's pulverized. There's usually electrolysis. They use surfactants to take it all off, and they're basically getting everything out of the ore. Is your opinion the same way?
I apologize. Could you repeat the question? I don't quite
Yeah,
understand.
these microprocessors, they're doing ore very differently. They're pulverizing the ore. They're using different surfactants and whatever weights of the things to pull off everything that's in these ores. Are you familiar with those?
No, I'm not familiar with the processing technology there.
Okay. Are you familiar with Schlumberger?
I know the company Schlumberger, yes.
Are you familiar with how they actually concentrate lithium?
No, I don't work on the processing side.
This comes back to the technology. It's advancing very, very fast. And this will, and Schlumberger can actually go into, like, say, we have a subterranean big lake south of, or west of me in Phoenix. It's actually in Buckeye. And they're actually, they can't use the water because it's very heavy metals and very briny. And they're hooking up these machines that actually will use the water because when you're using lithium, you have to use a lot of water. And they're actually producing cleaner water than actually what they're finding there. So I think there's a lot of upside on a lot of this. Mr. Barron, I think part of your problem is that on the land, we can't find a mine that the other side would like and would go along with. And they're no longer 29 years, over 3 decades. The Resolution Copper over here in eastern Arizona in the copper corridor was mined for over 100 years, and still we have gotten nowhere with it. So they haven't produced one piece of copper. So that's our frustration here. The other thing is misuse of some of the languages in the law. A president has no jurisdiction beyond 2 years and less than 5,000 acres to withdraw it in any way, shape, or form. So we gotta get back to the rule of law in that aspect. So I'm gonna cut my question short and go to the next round. So Mr. Case, you so diligently stay behind, we'd love to get your next 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Dr. Peacock. I'm going back to your testimony, and basically what your testimony offers is a view of minimal environmental impact based on your monitoring of tests conducted in 2021 and 2022. Were those Mr. Barron's company's tests?
No. The second test was the metals company test. We did a small component of that. We provided a new sediment sensor that we designed for monitoring. The first test was for a company called Global Sea Mineral Resources, also independently monitored by a European consortium called the Mining Impacts Consortium.
Okay, so these were private companies wanting to conduct deep sea mining. You were monitoring their tests, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and according to your testimony, these were quote unquote, I'm trying to find your quote, they were small scale, short-term pilot tests, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so these were not large-scale, longitudinal, real deep-sea mining tests. They were not tests of that. They were kind of like, hey, get in there, do a small pick, find out what the sediment is, et cetera.
I would agree with that with one exception, which is the scale of the vehicles themselves was not dissimilar from what a commercial scale would be. They're about a third the size of a commercial scale vehicle.
Okay, and were there a variety of approaches to deep sea mining tested, or were they focused on the pluck that has been testified to one of the measures? So in other words, did they, for example, do the large scale clamshell drop from the top of the ocean to the bottom, impacting the bottom, digging up deeper than a couple of inches? Did they do a dredge across the bottom? Did they do any of that stuff, or was it just like one approach?
So both companies used the same technology, which is this hydrodynamic suction technique. I'm not really aware of any commercial companies using sort of that sort of dredging type approaches from the top of the ocean.
All right, so you just did the suck thing, the hydrodynamic, go down there with a suction thing and suck it up.
Yeah, that's one of the sort of main technologies that people
All right,
are looking at.
but it's possible that there's other ways of getting stuff from the ocean floor, correct?
Yes.
You didn't
one of
test
my,
for that. Okay, and similarly, you only tested for sediment. You didn't test for other marine impacts, correct?
My group led the sediment studies, but there's an entire European consortium of 23 institutions that did all the biological studies.
Okay, and that, I want to get to that because I'm reading your testimony further, and you have a couple of specific recommendations in here. First of all, you say that you need to be very careful about where you conduct these extraction activities. You recommend a patchwork of protected areas. You suggest large areas off limits to mining, protecting some smaller areas. You definitely recommend a regulatory framework. You recommend dedicated programs to determine to detect impacts, monitoring. You talk a lot about the International Seabed Authority. In fact, you're a consultant, or you're actually a member of the International Seabed Authority indirectly, right?
I'm on the expert committee for thresholds for the ISA,
All right.
yes.
So you're not sitting here as an expert recommending that we do whatever we want on the seabed. You're recommending a specific regulatory framework for protecting the environment, which is similar to what the ISA is doing, right?
Yeah, I advocate for a step-by-step approach at increasing scales of operation and with robust guidelines, regulations to oversee that process.
Okay, and do you have a view about whether the executive order offers such a regulatory framework?
I don't have a view on that. I don't have familiarity with it.
Mr. Curry, and I'm going to do this rhetorically, and you can answer within 30 seconds. Fundamentally, the executive order ignores the International Seabed Authority, throws it out there. We're going to go this alone, right? China is a member of the International Seabed Authority, and China is obviously trying to manipulate it to its ends, but it's at least doing it within a framework of the International Seabed Authority law of the sea. We've decided not to do that. Is it correct that the actions by this president would incentivize China to go it alone with no environmental regulation whatsoever?
That is one possible outcome. The other possible outcome is that China positions itself as the leader of multilateralism and it goes that way. China is very smart about the way they look things forward. They clearly are very, very invested in pursuing deep sea mining, but not in any particular rush.
Okay.
So I think you'd find China coming back with a very measured response.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think the gentleman from Hawaii, the gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing 2 rounds. Dr. Peacock, I wanted to discuss your research related to seabed mining. We often hear from folks who are opposed to seabed mining that we don't actually know what exists on the seafloor. Is that an accurate assertion?
I often find these general statements not very enlightening. In terms of the global seafloor, the entire global seafloor is mapped to a resolution of 1.5 kilometers. About 25% of the ocean is mapped to a resolution of 100 meters. There are areas of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone that are mapped to within 1 centimeter. On the biological side, indeed, across the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, as I mentioned in my testimony, there are several thousand anticipated species, but only 500 have been named. But at particular nodule sites that have been studied for 10 to 20 years, there's far greater knowledge of what lives at those sites.
Thank you. In your written testimony, you talked about the need for improvement to technologies related to deep sea mining. And I know we've had a little bit of discussion about that already, but can you elaborate on what technologies need to be improved and how the government can ensure that entrepreneurs have the space to address these technological needs?
Yes, there are capable sensor systems that exist now that are being used throughout current trials, but as efforts would scale up, there's a need, for example, improved energy supplies to operate in the deep ocean for long periods of time. Battery technology is a challenge for their duration. Low-cost vehicles that could travel over these large distances of tens to hundreds of kilometers that the mining sites are assigned over 30-year timescales. So these kind of advances would be needed. And also on the computation side, the ocean is big, deep and vast. We can gather as much data as we can, but there will always be a need for computer modeling to help make the best use of that data. So advances in AI and GPU-based computing technology can really enhance our ability to understand where critical knowledge gaps are and where we should invest in and put sensors.
And the last question I want to ask you is, what areas do you think the United States surpasses China with technology and resources for deep sea mining and vice versa?
The US has a leading history, of course, from the 1970s in operating in the deep ocean, but there's been, and NOAA is a world-leading institution in terms of ocean research. In regards to deep sea mining, there has been very little investment from the US, of course, in the last few decades. So at this point, entities like China, Japan have advanced capabilities compared to the US.
Yeah, Mr. Barron and Mr. Gunnasekara, I want to ask that same question to you. Where do you see U.S. technology leading over China, or where does China have better technology than us in deep seabed mining?
Well, I've had the benefit of traveling to China a year ago and visiting Sanya on Hainan Island, where there's a community of 27,000 people all dedicated to building the technology stack. The good news is America did lead the space, as I articulated, in the 1970s. And American companies and universities have played an important part In our own operation, we have 4 universities who are contributing to our environmental research. We fund them, but they're free to go and do the work and publish their results. We conducted our own boat out of San Diego, where we ran 22 campaigns from the port of San Diego, carrying out research. Those campaigns run for between 6 and 8 weeks. And I think the innovation available in America is tremendous, and I think that you need to have something, a starting gun, and I think that starting gun was triggered last week by the President's executive order.
I would add and say that our technology is leading. I've spent 20 years living and working in Silicon Valley, and we've been able to pull together the most advanced technology, a completely new way to harvest these metals with the least impact and the least cost. Of course, China will copy us. Although we have US patents, right now we're in the driving position of having, I would say, the most advanced technology for this. But if we don't move quickly, China will overtake us. They're doing
Do
two
you think
collective
China
tests.
has had the same focus on the environmental sensitivity of harvesting these nodules that the U.S. has had?
No, not at all. They are actually doing 2 collector tests this year in the Clarendon-Clifton zone under the ISA. And so we can see these are traditional style collector vehicles that don't have as good an environmental impact as what we're attempting to deliver.
Thank you.
I think the gentlewoman, the ranking member, Dr. Dexter, is now recognized for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gunasekara, last year your company applied for mining exploration in U.S. waters near American Samoa, which BOEM denied after consultation with American Samoa. Shortly after, American Samoa announced a deep-sea mining moratorium in their territorial waters, citing threats to marine life, cultural heritage, and the territory's tuna fishery, which is a profoundly important one. But just this month, your company announced that it's applying for a lease to explore and potentially mine in federal waters near American Samoa. Why are you pursuing this venture when it's clear the most impacted community is opposed to the industry and the impacts it will cause to their environment and its economy?
So we've had extensive dialogue with the new administration. There has been an election since the moratorium was signed by the previous governor. There is a new governor, and in our discussions, we see that they are quite supportive, especially for the economic and jobs opportunity that deep-sea mining would unlock for them. It also, as I would say, the proposed area is hundreds of miles away from any land population, so significant distance. And with our technology, there is no mid-water plume. There will be 0 impacts to fishing. Of course, we will confirm that with an environmental impact assessment. Final thing I would say is that the Cook Islands, which is adjacent to American Samoa, recently signed an MOU with China for deep-sea mining. This is an opportunity to pull the Cook Islands back into the US camp because American Samoa is the nearest port with infrastructure that ultimately would be required for any deep-sea mining operation in the Cook Islands.
Okay. My guess is that the chance that there will be impacts on the fishing industries and on those cultural and community interest has not been verified that there will be no impact. We're making immense assumptions there, I would guess. Do you agree that that is accurate?
That's accurate, but that's the whole purpose of an environmental impact assessment. We're asking for this process to start. In the current legislation, there are 4 public consultation periods, so there would be a lot of opportunity to have all stakeholders contribute and provide input. I want to be clear, our request is not to go mining tomorrow, it's to formally start the process, which is going to be many years it will take.
Mr. Curry, I saw you nodding there. I would love your sort of assessment of the risks to the community and the fisheries from your assessments.
what struck me, frankly, is the dissonance of the answer Mr. Guinness-Sakara gave you and your question, if I may say so, about the cultural impacts. What we've learned in the International Seabed Authority in the last few years is that Pacific Islanders have very strong cultural ties to the Pacific Ocean, to the deep sea. It's not just about the physical impacts, it's about their cultural impacts, and these need to be taken into account. In my own country, New Zealand, the law requires that the Maori, the local people there, have an input into their cultural heritage and into their cultural perspective, and this is absolutely crucially important. That's the first thing, and the second thing is, yes, the Impossible Metals activities there with their partnerships with local industry seem to be really flying in the face of the local concerns and the moratorium that still is in place.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be quick, Mr. Chair, but Mr. Barron, sorry, I'm trying to make this quick. Commercially valuable tuna and their food source support a multi-billion-dollar tuna industry in the Pacific. But these are fish that are high on the food chain, and some toxics like manganese metals concentrate as they move up the food chain. Tuna in particular are one of the unfortunate repositories for mercury, for example, which is toxic to people. And now the tuna in the fisheries would be exposed to toxic metals found in sediment or discharge plumes generated through seabed mining. What guarantee can you provide that deep sea mining will not harm the Pacific tuna fisheries that American fleets and American consumers of seafood depend on?
Well, the good news is tuna are very heavily studied, and we have studied them when it comes to polymetallic nodules. And the food web that tuna depend on will not be impacted by any of our return sediment or any of the activities we carry. Firstly, we're not in the migration path, but also we return the water at 2,000 meters below sea level. And as part of the studies we carried out in 2022, from a production environment, we monitored and measured the benthic and the pelagic plume. We had 50 assets in the water measuring while we were in the production phase. So we have an enormous amount of data around this. And NOAA, who obviously have a regulatory environment to oversee this, will be furnished with all of that information. New Zealand, of course, have done extensive studies on this topic through their federal agency. Mr. Curry would no doubt be aware of them. And so it's well understood that tuna will not be impacted by our activity in the CCZ.
So just to verify, there have not been commercial level mining yet done. So I find it hard to make that sort of statement based on small level production at this point.
Well, I think the fact is the commercial trials we ran provide us the model to be able to then go and expand that model into a multi-year operation. But the key to think about is where tuna operate. They operate in the top hundreds of meters of the surface. And of course, they often feed on plankton that will go down to 1,000 or sometimes 1,200 meters. And that's why, with the feedback of environmental scientists, we return the water to a depth of 2,000 meters. There are some people that think we should tip the return water over the back of the boat because it would create an algae and it would be an amazing sequester of carbon. And maybe one day in the future, that's what the regulator will ask us to do because of the environmental benefits that come with that. But for the moment, our proposal is to return that water at 2,000 meters below sea level, out of every harm's way. There, of course, have been studies around bioavailability as well, and it appears that these metals in water are not bioavailable to species that digest them anyway.
So I just want to make the statement that as a physician who we've made many hypotheses on the complex biological ecosystems of the body, and our assumptions that we make based on small studies oftentimes are proven wrong over time. So I just want to caution this committee using small degree data over short periods of time in an incredibly complex ecosystem to make assumptions about. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentleman. Thank you, because you led into my questions. But the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Webster, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for kind of getting me into this committee. I appreciate it. I have a question for Mr. Guinness-Sakara. I sent a letter to the then Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, I think it was in 2023, urging him to develop a plan to counter the Chinese Communist Party's dominance and continued investment in critical minerals. Additionally, the United States holds only the observer status of the International Seabed Authority, the entity regulating deep sea mining. Since the sending of that letter in 2023, have you witnessed a difference on how the United States counters the CCP presence in seabed mining, and in what ways does still holding the observer status with the ISA affect your presence in the industry?
So China has, over the last few years, made massive investments in deep sea mining. They actually hold 4 concessions through the ISA, more than any other country. And what we know is that they have to submit an environmental impact statement for any collector testing, as has been done with other companies. And 2 of their companies are actually doing collector testing this year. So they are moving very, very rapidly, heavily investing. Now, you're correct. The US has not ratified the UN Law of the Sea, and so it only holds observer status, which means that it cannot take its full-time position on the Council. The US is the only country that is guaranteed a permanent seat on the Council, which is part of the executive branch of the International Seabed Authority. But fortunately, there is a law that was passed that allows the US to regulate, even though they have not ratified the sea. So, I think it would be ideal that the US influence could accelerate the timelines at the International Seabed Authority. As Mr. Barron pointed out, it has been 14 years since work started on the mining code. It's still not finished, and it's effectively being filibustered by a small number of countries that want to protect their domestic mining or have extreme environmental concerns. And so we would love to see that work actually conclude, and I think US leadership, if it was a member, could help.
Okay, I have another question then. During the Biden administration, you submitted a request to initiate the leasing process for critical minerals exploration in the U.S. economic zone, and that request was subsequently denied. You have now resubmitted the request of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. How will America lead critical mineral exploration in this portion of the globe and contribute to the ability to challenge China's growing dominance in deep sea mining?
Well, one of the advantages that we have over China is that we do have these minerals in our exclusive economic zone. That's something that China actually does not have. And so this gives us the ability to effectively mine our own waters. So the federal waters, the exclusive economic zone around American Samoa are our federal waters. They're exactly the same as if they were on federal land. And the ability to mine them ourselves, I think, is a great mitigation against China's control. Obviously, the laws have already been passed, but they are quite old and quite comprehensive in the fact that they need multiple public consultations. We would love to see a streamlining so that we could actually do all the environmental work and actually be mining in the next few years, not in the next 30 years, which is the average of a mine in the US.
Thank you very much. You're back.
I thank the gentleman. I'll now take my 5 minutes. This young lady talked about studies and, the scientific methodology that goes with it. So, Dr. Peacock, coming back to you again. Once again, you have a hypothesis, then you try to develop whether it's true or not, and you go beyond that, right? And you start with small pilot studies and you build them, build them, build them. Now, you're on that verge right now, it sounds to me like, because you had the one study that was a real big one and a bunch of smaller ones, right?
There have been two pilot-scale trials in 2021 and 22 that have brought a great deal of information. That's the latest.
Okay. Now, this collection of these nodules is nothing new, right, Mr. Gunzakara? Why I say that is I was in Norway 6 years ago, and they were showing us that the Chinese, with their icebreakers, were actually up in the Arctic Ocean doing this already, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, China is investing in marine technology in all areas. They're building massive amounts of ships, underwater vehicles. Their navy is growing very rapidly. And deep sea mining can be seen as a proxy for dual-use technology, especially the type of technology that we're building, which is autonomous underwater robots. These absolutely can have dual-use and military applications.
Oh, I certainly agree with you, because we had autonomous vehicles being built for resolution copper because they're extracting copper at 7,000 feet and below. That's where the majority of that's coming from. So China follows all the rules, Mr. Gunzakara. They follow all the rules, right?
They, not directly. Yeah. I mean,
So they only fish in their waters, right?
yeah, they
Yeah,
are
that's
known.
that's not what I hear. That's not what happens. You know, so from that standpoint, I think we got some problems here. Mr. Curry, Indigenous people, okay, I've lived my whole life with Native American tribes. A lot of their concepts are based upon what they've gone through the ages with, but they're also, these are teaching moments. Would you say that is true or not?
I'm sorry, what moment, sir?
So these are teaching moments when we have something that is different or may be construed as different as far as an Indigenous tribe.
They certainly have a different perspective, if that's what you're saying, sir, absolutely.
Yeah, so these could be teaching moments, you know, because, for example, let's say that we're talking about the collection of uranium, okay? And when we look at the breccia pipes in northern Arizona, okay, they're a collapsed bed. Now, I'm not a geologist, my dad was, but he taught us about that these are collapsed, they're more concentrated in that area, and they're also the lowest point. And so when you're getting radiation, you're getting it constantly. Every time it rains, every time it blows, you get that radiation. But if you sit down and say, listen, but if you take this out, you're gonna have less of that contact. So you have to weigh those prospects, going back to scientific methodology. But these are teaching moments because we're explaining why they're getting that exposure, how they're getting that exposure, and how much they're getting that exposure. So that plays a big deal with it, does it not?
Yes, I think what I was trying to say to the other member is that the cultural perspectives are important on their own, quite separate from the scientific issues. I mean, traditional knowledge is certainly becoming a very big topic of discussion in international law. I've just come from a meeting in the United Nations last week where it was very much in evidence. But I think the point is not just the Indigenous viewpoint of what's happening. That's important. It's also their cultural connection to the deep sea. That's is what I was really referring to.
Well, I guess my point is they're not mutually exclusive.
No.
Yeah, I think there you go. That's what my whole point was, is that
Thank you, sir.
you have this hypothesis and you have to disprove it. And you include people when you're doing that. And I think that's how medicine has gotten so good or bad, however you want to look at it, depending upon how you approach it, the disease or whatever. So now I'm going to ask you a question for each one of you. I'll start with you, Mr. Barrow. And it's the same question for all four of you. I've already warned you about this. What was the question you want asked today? What is the question that wasn't asked? And what's its answer? Mr. Barrow, you're first.
Well, that's a challenging one. My question would be, what if the environmental impacts are indeed exactly as we predict they will be? And what if recycling won't meet the needs that are sometimes speculated? What's the alternative? And I can provide you the answer as well. There isn't a good one. We need to find a supply of critical minerals with the lightest environmental and human impacts. And seafloor nodules are that answer.
Thank you, Mr. Burrow. Mr. Gansakara.
My comment would be on, let's consider how we get the metals we use today. Let's take nickel. 75% of it comes from rainforests in Indonesia. Majority is used in stainless steel, a little bit in batteries. Those rainforests are being completely destroyed because the nickel laterite ore is directly below the rainforest. The biodiversity, the carbon storage is immense. Let's talk about the social impact. They're indigenous people that live. Often they're being forced off their land at gunpoint. The water is being polluted. The fish are dying. It's an absolutely terrible situation. And guess who controls all of it? China. This is the current situation. We can deliver minerals from our own waters at lower cost. Lower cost will mean that those mines will close in Indonesia, just as today Indonesia has caused many mines in Australia to close because the price has come down. And to be clear, I'm comfortable with the price coming down. We have plenty of margin available with our 10x lower cost, and it will enable everyone to afford newer technologies like electric vehicles and other infrastructure. So we can do a huge benefit for the planet, environmentally, socially, and we can isolate ourselves from China control.
Thank you. Mr. Curie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a fascinating question. I would like to ask what would happen if the US goes it alone. And what I would postulate, firstly, I think would be a tragedy for the United States in stepping outside the multilateral framework and all the many effects it may have, including for freedom of navigation, marine scientific research, the US standing in the world. I think it has the potential for initiating a free-for-all, such as Mr. Case talked about, whether it's China, whether it's another country. If one country is doing it, if one operator is doing it, you may well get many operators doing it, causing massive destruction on unprecedented scale. You would have a great deal of legal litigation in the United States, possibly international. I think it will be a tragedy for the environment, a tragedy for the United States, and most importantly, a tragedy for multilateralism that has been in place for over 40, 50 years, put into recognizing that this area is a common heritage of humankind, needs to be looked after, needs to be for all generations and all peoples to look after. And it is difficult. It's frustrating. It's difficult, no doubt about that. But it's worked for 50 years, and we think that's the way to go. Thank you.
I think Dr. Peacock.
Thank you very much. I think the question I would like to be asked is, are the latest scientific findings being used to drive decisions and discussions about deep sea mining? And my answer to that is, I think, unfortunately, it's not the case. For example, we hear the topic of, will deep sea mining disturb carbon sequestration in the deep ocean? I think that was established in about 2020 that this is not an issue. I've studied sediment plumes for 10 years, but I read articles that a mining operation 2.5 miles down in the Pacific Ocean, 1,000 miles away, will reach Hawaii, which is simply not the case. The latest topic, of course, is debate is dark oxygen. That's been a very high-profile scientific study, and the scientific community is looking into it. The consensus emerging is that this does not seem to be an issue. There's a paper from 2006 that finds the opposite findings from the latest paper that came out. So I just really encourage the whole debate to take on board the latest science and data. Of course, I'm going to do that. I'm a faculty member at MIT. That's my role and that's my job. But I really think it's important to take on board learnings when we get them, whether they're good or bad. There's still a lot of questions about biodiversity, ecosystem function. We need to pay attention to those. But when something is determined and scientifically shown to be the case, we need to accept that and move on. Thank you.
Wow, what a discussion. I wish more people were here watching and seeing this. I know that the committee will have a bunch more questions, and they'll have to submit them in a certain way. Let's see. And we'll ask our witnesses to respond with those questions in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee may submit these questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, May 2nd. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business,
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to request that I be allowed to submit into the record several reports and documents.
without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much.
I will tell you, I'm fascinated by this, and I will tell you, we need to keep our eyes open. I'm not so leery of America. I want America to dream again. I want her to build again. I want her to lead again. And I think that's very important, Mr. Curry, I know that you're New Zealand. We share a common bond there. And I thank you very much for your travels. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.